The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals just heard oral arguments in a case that challenges the NFA and its suppressor restrictions as a violation of the Second Amendment. So let's break down what just happened in this critical case. Now, really quick before we jump into this video, I want to mention that looking at some of my analytics, about 60% of all my viewers are actually not subscribed to the channel. So if you enjoyed these videos, if you want to support the channel for free, please consider subscribing to the channel. I also want to mention once again that the Gundy's voting is currently open. You can vote for me using the links down below. And then also our podcast, the Liberty Lounge podcast. I'm personally up for Influencer of the Year. So again, you can vote every single day using the link down below. And when you vote, you're entered to win a bunch of giveaways for those categories. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be discussing a challenge that was just heard in front of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And this deals with the NFA and its restrictions on suppressors. This case is a direct challenge to the NFA and suppressor restrictions based on the Second Amendment. The case we're going to be discussing is U.S. versus Peterson. This case involves an individual who had his gun store raided by the ATF, and during that ATF raid, a single solvent trap was actually found. It was not registered or serialized. It was found, and therefore he was charged in being in violation of the NFA by having a suppressor that was not registered or serialized. So we need to break down what happened in this case and what happened during these arguments and what is the potential outcome. Now, in this case, Mr. Peterson on June 29th, 2022 was raided by both federal and state law enforcement officers. They executed warrants at his Louisiana home. Now, when it comes to the federal raid and the federal agencies and the ATF, they claim that Mr. Peterson engaged in illegal sales, that he did not file proper paperwork, and that also some of the firearms that were sold at his local store were then found and discovered at crime scenes. Now, during this raid, federal agents seized his entire inventory, which totaled over 300 firearms, and that also included all of his personal firearms. So out of the entire indictment, what ended up happening was they found a single solvent trap in a safe in his bedroom in his own home. And so that solvent trap was not serialized, it was not registered, and because of that single one, he was charged criminally for violating the NFA. On October 20th, 2022, he was indicted by a grand jury and charged with violating the NFA because he knowingly received a firearm not registered to him under the NFA. In response to that charge, Mr. Peterson filed a motion to dismiss the charge based on the Second Amendment. On August 21st, 2024, the court denied his motion to dismiss the indictment. And as a result of that, Mr. Peterson appealed the case up to the Fifth Circuit for review. Now, the question the Fifth Circuit has heard and will decide on is whether or not the district court erred in finding that silencers are not bearable arms covered by the Second Amendment. Now, in the ATF's brief to the Fifth Circuit, they first argued that suppressors are not arms at all protected by the text of the Second Amendment. They believe that the district court got the determination right, that silencers and suppressors are not arms, and that the Fifth Circuit should agree and uphold that decision. At best, the ATF claims that these are simply just accessories, and as accessories, they are not protected. Now, the last thing that the ATF argues is that under the recent Supreme Court decision in Bruin, they argue that the NFA's restrictions, the registration process, and all of that is a shall issue scheme, which is permissible under the Second Amendment and is outlined as permissible in the Bruin case. What they are pointing to here is Bruin, in some of the dicta by Justice Kavanaugh, mentioned that shall issue CCW licensing schemes, shall issue permits may be permissible under the Second Amendment, but now the ATF is taking that language from Bruin in arguing that the NFA process is shall issue, that it's a shall issue scheme, and it's similar enough to where it passes the Bruin standard. But now everything has come to a head and oral arguments happen in front of the Fifth Circuit. The judges on this panel are Chief Judge Jennifer Elrod, who is a Bush appointee, Patrick Higginbottom, who is a Reagan appointee, and then Leslie Southwick, who was appointed by Bush. Now, during this hearing, it was very interesting, and it seemed like at least Chief Judge Elrod, I believe it was, who was asking a lot of the questions. It seemed like she was very interested in this topic and was also maybe a little bit more plugged into the whole issue of these items than I potentially thought she would be. Now, it was hard to kind of tell because these are all oral arguments and we just have the audio, we don't have video. So I believe it was Judge Elrod and then also Judge Southwick who was asking a ton of the questions from both sides. Now, first, Chief Judge Elrod came out of the gates and mentioned that shouldn't suppressors not be mentioned as silencers? She said that we all know that these items specifically do not silence shots at all. It's not like that you can't hear them. And so wouldn't it be more appropriate to use the term suppressor? Now that's very interesting to have a judge on the Fifth Circuit being in tune enough with the mechanics of suppressors and knowing that, hey, yes, we should call them suppressors because they do not silence anything. So you can take that as a potential good sign that one of the judges actually understands the mechanics of these items. Now, there was also some questions, I believe, asked by Chief Judge Elrod about what about creating a circuit split with the 10th Circuit? And the case there that Judge Elrod, I believe, was mentioning was the USA versus Cox case out of the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. And that dealt with the state of Kansas and their SAPA law and two individuals who were jammed up, I believe, and it dealt with, having unregistered suppressors. The Fifth Circuit here was asking about creating a circuit split with the 10th Circuit, and is there any way to distinguish what happened in the USA versus Cox case in this specific lawsuit as well? And the biggest distinction with this is that the Kansas case there was ruled by the 10th Circuit back in 2018. And that was in a pre-Bruin world. That was before the Supreme Court issued Bruin, before they issued Rahimi. And really there, the 10th Circuit looked at the NFA suppression restrictions in light of Heller and analyzed it based on two-way questions in light of Heller. And they primarily also leaned on tiered-based scrutiny. Now, if you've been following this channel for a long time, you will know that in Bruin, they struck down tiered-based scrutiny. So the biggest distinguishment from what has happened in the 10th Circuit in this lawsuit is that 10th Circuit ruling is potentially no longer valid because it used tiered-based scrutiny. It was in a pre-Bruin world, and this is the first time that this type of NFA challenge is being analyzed in light of Bruin. Now, there were also a lot of questions brought up about shall issue schemes that were mentioned by Justice Kavanaugh in dicta in Bruin. And some of the judges here asked, is the NFA's process simply shall issue and therefore is it constitutional? Is it just a shall issue scheme as applied to suppressors and their registration? Now, the biggest issue with this, which I wish was mentioned during the oral arguments, is that no one yet has applied the dicta in Bruin about shall issue schemes to other types of regimes. The mention there was specific to CCW permit processes. It did not mention other processes at all or permit schemes, and no court yet has extended that shall issue scheme that was potentially permissible in dicta in Bruin. No one has extended that yet to other potential shall issue schemes like the NFA's process. There are also a ton of questions about whether or not the NFA's registration process even operates as shall issue. There were a lot of questions about the delays potentially for getting suppressors, and that is potentially so burdensome to not qualify under Bruin. Now, there was a lot of back and forth during the arguments, from both the ATF's representatives and then also Mr. Peterson's representatives about the potential wait times. There wasn't a ton of evidence in this record about wait times, but there was some mention from Silencer Shop from their website about the wait times when Mr. Peterson filed this lawsuit. Now, one of the very interesting things, again, that developed during these arguments was that at one point, the ATF's representative, the DOJ's representative during his arguments, was talking about the registration process and having to register firearms and saying that you have to go through the process under the NFA to register these firearms. And at one point, he expressly mentioned that suppressors are firearms. And then the judge there, I believe it was Judge Elrod, said, aha, didn't you just call them firearms? So how are we supposed to deal with that? You are saying that these are not arms, that they are not firearms, that they are not protected by the text of the Second Amendment, that the district court got that analysis right. And so how can you say that? And then here during these arguments, you are saying expressly that they are firearms. So that was a huge mistake, a huge slip by the ATF representative. And so these were some very interesting arguments. There are plenty of outs for the three-judge panel here if they do not want to rule in favor of Mr. Peterson. It's kind of hard to get the general tone of these judges. I think Judge Elrod was asking a lot of questions, but they were also just giving a ton to Mr. Peterson's representatives. But I could still also see all three judges deciding that, there were errors in this case, that there's not enough evidence or enough support, and therefore kicking this case back down and saying, yes, the district court got it correct. So very interesting arguments, very interesting case, and now we will wait to see how the Fifth Circuit rules on this critical issue. But despite how they rule, there is always the potential to still seek en banc panel review or then potentially go to the Supreme Court. So if anything else develops, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm. and it signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of 2A news. But as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and never forget this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.